The Louisiana Bayou does not give back what it takes. That is not a saying. That is not folklore passed down through generations of people who needed something to explain the dark. That is the conclusion reached independently by every sheriff, every physician, every investigator, every ordinary person who has ever sat down with a set of official records from this part of the world and tried with patience and good faith to make sense of what the documents describe. The bayou is not like other landscapes. In other places, the land holds its shape. Hills stay hills. Rivers run in one direction. The border between solid ground and open water is a line you can draw, a line that stays where you put it. In the Louisiana lowlands, that border is a negotiation that never ends. The water moves into the land, and the land dissolves into the water, and what is left is something that belongs fully to neither. A world in between, where the cypress trees grow out of the water itself, and the roots grip something far below the surface that no survey has ever adequately mapped. People have lived in this landscape for a very long time. They have named its channels and its hollows. They have built their camps on its banks and fished its water, and learned its moods the way you learn the moods of something ancient and large that tolerates your presence without ever fully accepting it. They have developed, over generations, an acute sensitivity to the moments when the bayou shifts, when the water moves differently, when the birds go quiet, when the air changes in ways that do not correspond to any change in the weather. The Cajun trappers and fishermen who worked these waterways in the years around the turn of the 20th century were not superstitious men in the way that word is usually meant. They were practical. They were observant. They had learned to read the bayou the way a physician reads a body, looking for the small signs that precede the large events, the subtle wrongness that arrives before the obvious disaster. When those men said something felt wrong, they were not speaking from fear. They were speaking from knowledge. Between the years 1897 and 1912, 3 incidents occurred within 100 miles of one another in the parishes south of Baton Rouge. 3 separate investigations were opened by 3 separate law enforcement offices. 3 separate investigations were closed, each one filed away with the same quiet inadequacy. The official language of institutions that have reached the edge of what their methods can explain and have chosen, rather than admit that edge exists, to call the matter resolved. Across 3 separate sets of official records, deputies' reports, physicians' notes, court logs, coroner's findings, and in one case, a private letter that was not discovered until 64 years after it was written. The same question surfaces again and again, in different handwriting, in different years, from people who never knew one another and never compared notes. What did the bayou want with them? The first incident took place in the early autumn of 1901, on a stretch of dark water called Bayou Sorrel in Iberville Parish. 7 men from New Orleans had rented a fishing camp for a late-season expedition. They were found on the Monday morning of September 14th by their hired guide, a trapper named Clovis Arsenault, seated in a perfect circle on the back porch of the camp, eyes open, hands resting palms upward on their knees, not breathing. No cause of death was ever determined. In the center of the circle there was a depression in the wooden planks of the porch floor, roughly 8 inches in diameter, as though something had rested there with great weight. There was nothing in the depression when the deputies arrived. There was nothing to explain why 7 men had arranged themselves in that posture, in that circle, and died there together without a mark on any of them. The second incident was 4 years earlier, November of 1897, on a sugarcane plantation in St. John the Baptist Parish, 22 miles upriver from New Orleans. A family of 12 people vanished from their home sometime in the night, leaving every lantern burning, every door standing open, food on the table still cool but not cold, a pot on the stove not yet dried out, and the nightgowns of 2 small children folded neatly on the foot of a bed. No one in any direction had seen them leave. No trace of them was found in the cane fields, the tree line, or the swamp beyond. Not one of the 12 was ever located. Not a bone, not a piece of clothing, not a single physical remnant in any direction from that house, where every lamp kept burning, and the biscuits were still warm, and a wooden spoon waited on the edge of a pot for a hand that did not come back. The third incident took place in the spring of 1912, 15 years after the first and 11 years after the second, when a woman was found walking barefoot on the levee road near Plaquemine in a white dress at 6:30 in the morning, speaking a language that a professor of linguistics from Tulane University, after 4 hours of careful examination, concluded was unlike any human language he had ever encountered or studied. She was placed in a locked cell at the Iberville parish jail. On the 6th morning of her detention, the cell was empty. The lock was intact. The iron grate on the window was bolted from the outside, undisturbed. No exit point was ever identified. The jail log entry for that morning reads, in its entirety, "Unknown female, cell 3. Escaped or otherwise departed. Circumstances unknown. 3 cases. 15 years. 100 miles of bayou water between them." This is what the records say happened. The man who found the 7 men was named Clovis Arsenault, and he was the kind of man the bayou makes. Patient, observant, deeply uncomfortable with any explanation that did not account for every fact. He was 44 years old in September of 1901. He had been trapping and guiding on the waters around Bayou Sorrel since he was 19 years old. First alongside his father, and then, after his father's death in 1882, alone. He knew that particular stretch of water with the intimacy of long acquaintance. Not just its geography, but its character. The way it behaved in different seasons. The small signals it sent before a storm or a flood. The way the current shifted. In September, when the temperature dropped by a degree or two, and the catfish moved east toward the deeper channels. He had been hired in late August of 1901 by a group of 7 men from New Orleans who wanted a guide for a late-season fishing expedition. He had met them at the landing at Maringouin, looked them over, decided they were not the kind of men who would get themselves into serious trouble, and agreed to take the work. He spent 2 full days on the water with them, the 11th and 12th of September, and found them exactly as he had expected. City men, a little soft, but good-natured and willing to learn. Hardin Beauchamp, the cotton merchant who had organized the trip, was 52 years old and loud in the way that men become when they are trying to compensate for not knowing what they are doing. He had caught a 12-pound catfish on the afternoon of the 12th and had not stopped talking about it by the time Arsenault left them that evening. The camp they had rented sat on a raised bank on the eastern side of the bayou. It was a simple structure. 2 rooms connected by a short hallway, a covered porch on the front that faced the water, and a second smaller porch on the back that faced east toward the tree line. There was a wood stove in the main room, an iron pot, a lantern on the table. The dock was 20 feet long and had room for 2 flat-bottomed boats. Arsenault had agreed to return Monday morning to take them out one final time before they made the drive back to New Orleans. He arrived at the landing shortly after 7 and pulled his pirogue up the bayou to the camp, in a light September mist that was already beginning to burn off as the sun climbed. He noticed the smell before he could see the camp clearly, He would describe it later to Deputy Sheriff Émile Fontenot in precise terms. Not the smell of death, which he knew well from years of trapping and could identify at considerable distance, but something different. Something he associated with electricity. The way the air smells in the seconds before a lightning strike, when the charge builds in the atmosphere, and the hair on your arms rises, and the back of your throat tightens with a metallic sweetness that has no equivalent in ordinary experience. He said that smell reached him when he was still 50 yards from the dock, and that he slowed his pace without quite knowing why, the way an animal slows when it registers something wrong before it can identify what the wrong thing is. The boats were still tied to the dock. The camp was quiet. He called out from the water. No answer. He tied his pirogue and walked up the bank to the front porch and found the door standing open, the wood stove cold, the whiskey bottle 3/4 empty on the table, the cards still laid out in the middle of a game. He went through the camp room by room. The beds had been slept in. Personal belongings, boots, jackets, fishing gear, were present and undisturbed. There was a plate with the dried remnants of a meal on the table. The lamp had burned down to nothing and gone out on its own. He walked around to the back porch. They were sitting in a circle. He stopped at the corner of the porch and stood there for what he estimated, when he tried to reconstruct it later, was somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. He did not call out. He said that he understood immediately and with complete certainty that calling out would change nothing, because the 7 men on the porch were beyond the reach of any sound he could make. He understood this not from a single observation, but from the totality of what he was seeing. The absolute stillness of their bodies, the quality of the light on their faces, something in the posture of the hands that suggested a finality he had no word for. They were seated cross-legged on the wooden planks in a circle of approximately 8 feet in diameter, evenly spaced, all facing inward toward the center. Their hands rested on their knees with the palms turned upward and the fingers slightly curved, in a posture that Arsenault, a devout Catholic who had attended Mass at St. John the Baptist Church in Plaquemine every Sunday of his adult life, described as the posture of a man in the act of receiving communion, or of a man who has opened his hands to show that they are empty, or of a man waiting to be given something. None of them were breathing. Their eyes were open and fixed on the center of the circle. Their expressions were, and here Arsenault paused in his account to Fontenot and took a long time finding the word. Neutral. Not peaceful, he said. Not afraid. Not surprised. Neutral. The way a face looks when whoever was behind it has left, and no emotion remains to animate the features. He pulled his pirogue 4 miles down the bayou to the general store in Maringouin, where there was a telephone. He called the Iberville parish sheriff's office and reported what he had found. His voice, the store owner would later recall, was completely level. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has already done whatever internal processing was required and has arrived at the point where only facts remain. Deputy Sheriff Émile Fontenot arrived at the camp that afternoon with 2 deputies and a physician named Dr. Augustin Broussard, who had practiced medicine in Iberville Parish for 17 years and had seen, as he noted in his report, a considerable variety of ways that the human body fails. The 7 men were identified from papers found in their belongings. Hardin Beauchamp, age 52, cotton merchant, New Orleans. Thomas Guidry, age 38, bank clerk, New Orleans. Walter Fisk, age 44, printer, Gretna. Marcel Trosclair, age 30, dry goods clerk, New Orleans. Edouard Chauvin, age 46, retired schoolteacher, Donaldsonville. Percy Moss, age 27, telegraph operator, New Orleans. And James Aldridge, age 35, occupation listed in the report as laborer, home address unknown. A man about whom, despite subsequent inquiries, the sheriff's office was never able to learn anything beyond the name on the papers in his jacket pocket. Dr. Broussard examined each man individually and took careful notes. Body temperature in each subject was significantly lower than the ambient conditions. A warm September afternoon in Louisiana would produce even in a body that had been dead for 36 hours. There was no rigor mortis in any of the 7, despite the estimated time of death. The eyes of each man, though open and exposed to the air, showed none of the clouding or desiccation that consistently appears in eyes left open in warm conditions for more than a few hours, let alone a day and a half. The skin showed no discoloration, no bloating, none of the signs that decomposition had begun. Broussard wrote in his notes, in the careful and slightly compressed handwriting of a man who has learned to keep his professional observations separate from his personal reactions. The condition of these men does not conform to any pattern of death with which I am familiar after 17 years of practice. I can determine no cause. I can determine no mechanism. The physical presentation is consistent with neither natural death, nor poisoning, nor suffocation, nor any traumatic cause. I can determine only that they are dead, that they died apparently at the same moment, in the same posture, without pain or struggle, and without any physical explanation that falls within the range of my training or experience. Fontenot's report, filed September 15th, describes the scene in the methodical prose of a man who has decided to record precisely what he observed and to leave all interpretation to others. He notes the position of each body, the arrangement of the circle, the orientation of the hands. Near the end of his description of the back porch, in the same tone he has used for everything else, he notes the following. In the center of the circle, at the geometric point, equidistant from all 7 seated figures, there is a depression in the wooden planks of the porch floor. The depression is circular, approximately 8 inches in diameter, and no more than half an inch deep at its lowest point. The edges of the depression are smooth, not splintered, as though the wood compressed gradually under sustained weight, rather than fracturing under sudden impact. There is no object in the depression. There is no staining or residue of any kind within or around it. The depression was not present in an earlier inspection of the camp conducted by the property's owner in July of this year. There was nothing in the depression when the deputies arrived. Fontenot does not speculate about the depression. He records it, describes it, and moves on to the next observation. It is the last mention of the depression in any official document connected to the case. The bodies were transported to Plaquemine. The parish coroner, Dr. Felix Landry, performed autopsies over the following 3 days. His findings matched Broussard's in every significant respect. No cause of death was determinable. Stomach contents showed no poison detectable by the methods available in 1901, though Landry noted, with evident frustration, that those methods had meaningful limitations and that certain substances, he did not specify which, would have left no trace he could identify. The toxicology section of his report ends with a sentence that was unusual enough in its frankness to be underlined by a later archivist who cataloged the file in 1932. I cannot tell you what killed these men. I can tell you only that something did. The case was closed in November of 1901. The official cause of death listed for all 7 men was unknown. Clovis Arsenault gave one interview after the investigation concluded to a reporter from the Baton Rouge Daily Advocate named Samuel Picard. who drove out to Maringouin in December of 1901 specifically to find him. The interview was published on December 9th of that year under the headline, "Guide Who Found 7 Dead Men on Bayou Sorrel Speaks." Picard asked Arsenault if he had any theory about what had happened to the 7 men. Arsenault was quiet for a long time. "I think they were called," he said finally. Picard asked what he meant by that. Arsenault looked out the window of the room they were sitting in, at the street outside, at the ordinary movement of an ordinary afternoon in a town that had nothing unusual about it. "I think something in that swamp called out to them," he said, "and I think they heard it. And I think they went to the back porch because that was where the call was coming from. And I think whatever called them took from them the thing that makes a man and leaves a body behind. And I don't think they were afraid when it happened. I think they were expecting it. I think that's what their hands were saying." Picard asked what their hands were saying. Arsenault looked at him. "They were open," he said. "You don't open your hands if you're afraid. You open your hands if you're ready to receive something. Those men were ready." He moved his family from Maringouin to Baton Rouge the following spring. He told his wife, according to a letter she wrote to her sister in Lafayette in April of 1902, that he was not afraid of the bayou. He was afraid of what was in it. And he was afraid, more than anything, that whatever had called those 7 men might call him too, and that he might answer. He never returned to Bayou Sorrel. The fishing camp stood empty for several years before the structure began to deteriorate. When a historian named Margaret Caillou attempted to locate the site in 1947 as part of a survey of Iberville parish landmarks, she found only the pilings, rotted to near nothing, jutting from the surface of the water at the edge of the eastern bank. The porch where 7 men had sat in a circle was gone. The floor with its depression was gone. Everything that had held the evidence of that September morning had dissolved back into the swamp. The depression in the porch floor appeared in one document, Fontenot's report, and in no document after that. It was mentioned to no journalist, no subsequent investigator, no archivist. Whether Fontenot himself thought about it in the years after he filed that report, whether it stayed with him the way certain things stay with the men who are asked to observe them and record them without being allowed to understand them, the record does not say. 4 years before Clovis Arsenault found 7 men in a circle on the back porch of a fishing camp on Bayou Sorrel, in a different parish, in a different season, a different kind of disappearance was beginning. It began with a factor named Gustave Hebert, age 46, who managed accounts for several plantation operations along the river road in St. John the Baptist Parish. Every Wednesday, Hebert made his rounds, riding his horse from one property to the next, collecting tallies, checking on the progress of the cane, exchanging the ordinary professional courtesies that kept the business of agriculture moving. He had been making these rounds for 11 years. He knew every property on his route, and he knew the rhythms of every household on it. On Wednesday, November 4th, 1897, he arrived at the Tureaud plantation at approximately 9 in the morning, as he always did on Wednesdays. He found the front gate open. This was not unusual. The gate was often left open during working hours. He rode up the oak-lined drive toward the house and noticed, as he came closer, that the front door was open. Both of the front windows were open. There was no sound from inside the house, and no sound from the kitchen house or any of the outbuildings. He called out from the drive. No answer. He tied his horse to the post at the bottom of the gallery steps and climbed up to the porch and looked through the open front door. Every lamp in the front room was burning. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, The sun was fully up. There was no reason for any lamp to be lit, let alone all four of them, at full wick, with the oil recently replenished, the flame steady and strong. Hebert stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the lamps, understanding before he could articulate it that something was wrong in a way that he did not have the experience or the vocabulary to precisely define. Then he went inside. He walked through every room of the main house. Every lamp was burning. In the front room, in the back parlor, in each of the 3 bedrooms, in the hallway. Every window was open. Every interior door stood wide. In the largest bedroom, Auguste and Celeste's room, the bed was made with the precision of someone who makes beds carefully every morning out of habit. On the bedside table, Auguste's pocket watch lay open. The hands read 4:52. Whether the watch had simply run down to that hour, or whether it had stopped at the precise moment of something, the record does not say. He went to the kitchen house. A pot of grits sat on the stove, cooked through and beginning to dry at the edges, as though it had been left unattended for 3 or 4 hours. A pan of biscuits on the work table was still soft, not warm, but not yet hardened. Clotilde, the elderly woman, who had cooked for the Tureaud family for more than 20 years, kept a wooden spoon resting on the edge of the pot in the particular way that a woman keeps a tool she intends to return to in a moment. The spoon was there, balanced on the rim, waiting. Hebert went to the outbuildings. The horses were in the stable, calm, fed, watered, showing no sign of disturbance. The mule was in its pen. The chicken yard was latched from the outside, which meant that whoever had latched it last was no longer inside it. The quarters where the household workers lived were empty and neatly kept. He rode back out to the river road and flagged down a passing wagon and sent word to the St. John the Baptist Parish Sheriff's Office in Edgard. Sheriff Octave Boudreau arrived that afternoon with 3 deputies, and what followed was the kind of investigation that begins with confidence and ends with the particular exhaustion of men who have applied every tool available to them and found the tools insufficient. They searched the cane fields, row by row, 4 men walking parallel lines through the tall stalks in the November heat for 2 hours, finding nothing. They searched the tree line at the western boundary of the property, where the cultivated land ended and the forest began. They followed the narrow path through the forest that led toward the bayou until the path became indistinguishable from the surrounding swamp. They found no bodies, no clothing, no dropped objects, no signs of passage in any direction. They returned to the house and searched it again more carefully, and this time they found the details that Boudreau would record in his report. In the front room, the dining table was set for breakfast. 8 place settings, plates, cups, silverware, laid out with care. Food had been served onto 7 of the 8 plates, grits, biscuits, a portion of salt pork on each. None of it had been touched. The coffee in 7 of the 8 cups was cool. Not cold, not at room temperature, but the specific temperature that coffee reaches when it has been sitting for 2 or 3 hours. The 8th plate was empty. The 8th cup was empty. The chair at the 8th setting was pushed back from the table at an angle, not parallel to the table's edge the way the other chairs were, as though the person sitting there had stood up suddenly, without pausing to push the chair back in. Who had been sitting at that 8th place, and why their plate was empty, and why they had stood up in a hurry? The report does not speculate. Boudreau simply records it. In the bedroom belonging to Marguerite and her husband Prosper, the 2 children's nightgowns, Henri's and little Adele's, were folded neatly and placed on the foot of the bed. Boudreau's deputies noted this detail separately from the rest of the bedroom description. in a way that suggests it struck them as significant, without their being able to say exactly why. A child of 6 and a child of 4 do not fold their nightgowns. Someone had folded them. Someone had taken the time, in whatever was happening, to fold 2 small nightgowns and place them on the foot of the bed. In Rosalie's room, her Bible lay open on the writing desk. It was open to the book of Exodus, chapter 12, the chapter describing the final plague, the death of the firstborn, and the instructions given to the Israelites for the night that followed. The page was not marked. There was no note. Whether Rosalie had been reading it that night, or whether the Bible had been opened to that page by someone else, or whether the coincidence of the passage was a coincidence at all, Boudreaux's report does not say. He records the book, the chapter, and moves on. The investigation continued for 4 days. Boudreaux contacted the parish authorities upriver and downriver. He sent word to New Orleans. He interviewed every neighbor and tenant farmer within a 10-mile radius. He found no one who had seen any member of the Tureaud family after the previous Wednesday, when Hébert had visited and found everything normal. He found no one who had heard anything from the direction of the plantation on the night of November 3rd. He found no physical evidence of departure in any direction. The investigation was formally suspended in January of 1898. No bodies were ever located. No death certificates were ever issued, because without bodies, there could be no legal determination of death. The Tureaud estate remained in the legal limbo for years before a court finally authorized the property to be treated as abandoned. It sold at auction in 1903. There is one document connected to the Tureaud case that was not part of the official investigation. It is a letter written in French by a woman named Eulalie Fontenot, who lived on the neighboring property to the north of the Tureaud plantation, with her husband and their grown children. Eulalie was 62 years old in November of 1897. She had lived next to the Tureaud family for nearly 30 years. She had known Céleste Tureaud well enough to visit for coffee on Saturday mornings. She had watched Henri and Adele playing in the oak-lined drive. The letter is addressed to her sister, a woman named Marguerite Arsenault, who lived in New Orleans. It is dated November 6, 1897, 2 days after Hébert found the empty house. It was discovered in 1961, 64 years after it was written, by an archivist processing a donation of family papers to the Louisiana State Archives made by Eulalie's granddaughter. It had never been shown to investigators, never been mentioned in any official document, never been read by anyone outside the family. The relevant portion of the letter, translated from the French, I did not tell the sheriff what I saw, because I am not certain what I saw, and I am certain that he would not believe me. I am not certain I believe it myself, except that I know I was awake, and I know I was at the window, and I know what I saw was there. On the night of the 3rd, the night before Gustave found the house empty, I was awake at some late hour, I cannot say exactly. After midnight, before dawn. I went to the window because something woke me. Not a sound. The opposite of a sound. You know how it is here at night. The frogs, the insects, the water moving, all of it constant, all of it present. The way breathing is present, so that you stop hearing it, the way you stop hearing your own heart. On the night of the 3rd, it stopped. All of it. At once. Complete silence. The kind of silence that feels like pressure on the ears. I stood at the window for what felt like a long time. And then I saw the light. It was moving through the tree line between our property and theirs. Not lamplight. Lamplight flickers, and it has a color, and it bobs when the person carrying it moves. This did not flicker. It did not bob. It moved in a straight line, steadily, at the pace of a person walking without hurry. It came from the direction of their house. It moved through the trees toward the bayou. It was in the trees for perhaps 2 minutes, and then it was gone. And as soon as it was gone, the frogs began again, all at once, the same way they had stopped, as though whatever had required the silence had passed. I went back to bed. I did not sleep. In the morning I heard what Gustave had found, and I understood that whatever I had seen in the trees was connected to it. And I understood also that I could not say so to the sheriff, because I had no words for it that would satisfy a man who needs words he already recognizes. I am writing it to you because I cannot write it to anyone else, and because I need it to exist somewhere outside my own memory before I convince myself that I imagined it. Eulalie Fontenot made no further reference to the Tureaud family in any of her surviving letters. She died in 1909, 12 years before the archivist, who would eventually find her letter, was born. The 12 people who had lived on that plantation, Auguste and Celeste, Marguerite and Prosper, Henri and Adèle, Rosalie, Fernand, Clotilde, Josephine and Marie, were never found. In any direction, by any means, in any year after November 3rd, 1897, not one trace of any one of them has ever been located. The biscuits went stale. The grits hardened. The lamps eventually burned through their oil and went out, one by one, in the empty rooms of a house where every window was open and every door was standing wide, as though the house itself had been left in a posture of waiting for someone who had gone toward the water and had not come back. 11 years after 7 men were found in a circle on Bayou Sorrel, and 15 years after 12 people followed a light through the trees toward the water and did not return, a farmer named Edmond Préjean was driving his mule-drawn wagon north on the levee road near Plaquemine in the gray early light of March 19th, 1912, when he came around a curve and nearly ran down a woman walking alone in the center of the road. He pulled his mule up hard. The wagon stopped. The woman stopped. She was standing in the middle of the road, looking at him with an expression that Préjean would struggle for years to describe accurately. Not startled, not afraid, not confused by the sudden appearance of a wagon around a curve. She had the look, he said, of someone who had been expecting an encounter of some kind and was reserving judgment on whether this particular one was the one they were waiting for. She was barefoot. The levee road in that section was surfaced with crushed oyster shell, a surface that would cut bare feet within 100 yards of walking on it, under ordinary circumstances. Her feet, when Dr. Henri Arcand examined them later that morning, were uncut and unbruised. She was wearing a white cotton dress, long-sleeved, with a plain neckline, and no ornamentation of any kind. The dress was damp in places, as though she had been near water, but not muddy, not soaked. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders. She was, Préjean estimated, somewhere between 25 and 35 years old, though he acknowledged when pressed that he found her age genuinely difficult to place, in a way that he could not fully explain. He called out to her. Was she all right? Did she need help? Had something happened? She looked at him steadily. Then she spoke. He could not understand a word of it. Edmond Préjean had been born in 1855 in Iberville parish. He spoke Cajun French as his first language and English as his second. He had grown up around people who spoke both, and he had heard enough of the other languages present in that part of Louisiana. The German of the river parishes, some Spanish from New Orleans, the remnants of Houma and Chitimacha from the people whose land all of this had once been. To know when he was hearing something unfamiliar. What the woman on the road was speaking was unfamiliar, in a way that went beyond simply being a language he had not learned. It had, he said, a quality he did not know how to put into words. Sounds in it that seemed to require a different kind of throat to produce, a rhythm that did not map onto any rhythm of speech he had encountered. He offered her a place in the wagon. She accepted, or he interpreted her response as acceptance, and she climbed up without resistance. He drove her into Plaquemine and delivered her to the Iberville Parish Sheriff's Office, where Deputy Clarence Tureaud received them both with the measured patience of a man accustomed to the variety of situations that the levee road produced. Tureaud attempted to communicate with her in English and in French. She responded each time, promptly, at appropriate length, making eye contact, pausing in what seemed like the right places, in the same language she had used with Prejean. Tureaud noted in his report that she appeared to understand that he was asking her questions, and to be providing answers. The answers were simply not available to him. She was not agitated. She was not hostile. She sat in the chair beside his desk, with her hands in her lap and her posture straight, and responded when addressed, and was otherwise still. Dr. Henri Arcan arrived within the hour and conducted a physical examination. She was in good health. No injuries, no signs of trauma, no fever, no evidence of malnutrition or extended exposure. Her feet, as noted, were undamaged, despite the surface of the levee road. Arcan estimated her age as 25 to 35. He could not determine her background or origin with any confidence. His intake form, preserved in the Iberville parish records, contains the following notation under the field for language: unknown. Under additional notes, he wrote, "Patient presents no pathology of any kind. Cognition appears intact. Affect is calm and appropriate. Communication not possible due to language barrier of unidentifiable origin. Recommend consultation with linguist if one can be located." Sheriff Léonce Dugas, who had been in office for 3 years, and who was, by all accounts, a thorough and unsentimental man, took the recommendation seriously. He contacted the Department of Modern Languages at Tulane University in New Orleans and described the situation. A professor named William Hartley, age 51, who had spent his career studying Romance languages and had done field work on several Gulf Coast Native American languages in the 1890s, agreed to come to Plaquemine and conduct an examination. He arrived on March 21st, 2 days after the woman had been found. He spent 4 hours with her. His notes from that session, 11 pages of close academic handwriting, were donated to the Tulane archives in 1958 by his son, who had found them among his father's papers after his death. They had not been published. They had not been shared with the sheriff's office or with the parish authorities. Hartley had, it appears, taken them home and kept them. The final page of those notes contains his conclusions. He wrote, "I have now spent 4 hours in this woman's company, attempting by every method available to me: systematic vocabulary testing, phonological analysis, grammatical probing, comparison to every language family I have studied or encountered in my career, to identify what she is speaking. I have been unable to do so. Let me be precise about what I mean by unable. I do not mean that she is speaking a language I have not personally encountered before, which would not be remarkable. I mean that the language she is speaking does not share phonological features, the basic sound structures that all human languages share to varying degrees, with any language family I am aware of. The vowel system does not correspond to any documented vowel system. The consonants include sounds that I cannot reproduce and that do not appear in any phonetic inventory I have studied. The syntactic patterns, insofar as I can identify them, do not follow any logic I can map onto any grammatical structure I know. I want to be careful here, because I am a scientist, and I do not believe in the supernatural, and I am aware that what I am writing sounds like the beginning of a claim I do not intend to make. I am not saying this woman is not human. I am not saying she comes from somewhere impossible. I am saying that if she learned this language from other people, in the normal way, through childhood, through community, through daily use, then those people and that community are not represented in any linguistic documentation that currently exists and are not known to me or, I strongly suspect, to any living scholar of language. I spoke with her for 4 hours. She was patient with me. She seemed, at various points, to be attempting to help me understand, to find points of contact, to locate some shared reference. She did not find one. Neither did I. Hartley caught the afternoon train back to New Orleans. His notes went into a drawer and stayed there for 46 years. The woman remained in custody. She was not charged with any crime. There was no crime to charge her with. She was held because she could not be identified, and because releasing her to wander the levee road again, speaking a language no one could understand, seemed, to Sheriff Duga, like an inadequate response to the situation. She was given a cell, a cot, regular meals, clean clothing. The deputies who interacted with her daily reported consistently that she was cooperative, calm, and apparently in good spirits. She ate everything that was brought to her. She slept. She sat on the edge of her cot and looked at the wall, or at the window, or at whoever came through the door, with the same expression that Edmond Prejean had seen on the levee road. That particular quality of watchful patience, as though she was waiting for something specific to arrive. On the evening of March 23rd, the night deputy checked on her at 10 o'clock, as was standard procedure. She was on her cot. The dinner tray from that evening was on the floor beside her, empty. He noted in the log that she appeared to be in her usual condition and that nothing unusual was observed. At 6 o'clock the following morning, the day deputy unlocked the cell to bring breakfast and found the cell empty. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he checked the lock, which was intact. He checked the door, which showed no damage. He went to the window, a narrow horizontal slit near the ceiling, 8 inches tall and 14 inches wide, covered on the outside by an iron grate bolted to the exterior wall. The grate was in place. The bolts were tight. There was no damage to the grate, the frame, or the wall around it. The window opening, at its widest, was 14 inches. A grown woman could not have passed through that opening. A small child would have had difficulty. There was no other opening in the cell. The walls were solid brick. The floor was stone. The ceiling showed no disturbance. The dinner tray from the previous evening was on the floor beside the cot, empty, exactly where the night deputy had seen it at 10 o'clock. The blanket on the cot was folded, not thrown back, not disturbed, but folded with some care and placed at the foot of the cot. She had eaten her dinner. She had folded her blanket. And then she had left a locked brick cell through no opening that any subsequent examination could identify. Sheriff Duga filed his report that afternoon. It is 3 paragraphs. The final paragraph. No explanation for the subject's disappearance has been determined. The cell was secure. The window grate was intact and undisturbed. No entry or exit point has been identified by examination of the cell or the surrounding structure. The matter is referred to the state authorities for further investigation. There is no record, in any archive, of any further investigation by the state authorities. The jail log entry for the morning of March 24, 1912 reads, "Unknown female, cell 3. Escaped or otherwise departed. Circumstances unknown. Edmond Préjean, the farmer who had found her on the road, was interviewed by the Plaquemine Gazette Journal in April of that year. A month after she had disappeared from the cell, the reporter asked him whether, looking back on the morning he had found her, he had any sense of where she might have come from. Préjean was quiet for a moment. He said he had thought about that question a great deal since the morning on the road, and that the more he thought about it, the less certain he was that coming from somewhere was the right way to think about it. When he had come around that curve and found her in the road, he said, it was not like coming upon a person who had been walking for an hour and was tired, or a person who had gotten lost and was frightened, or any of the ordinary conditions in which you find a person on a road in the early morning. It was like she had arrived at that point in the road, the way certain things arrive. Suddenly, completely, already in the middle of themselves, like a dream that begins not at the beginning, but at the moment that matters." The reporter asked if he had been afraid of her. Préjean shook his head. "No," he said, "not afraid. Something else. Something more like the feeling you get at the edge of something large. A cliff or a very deep body of water. Not afraid of falling, just aware of the depth." He was asked if he thought she was dangerous. He thought about it carefully before answering. "I think we were outside of whatever she was part of," he said finally. "I think she looked at us the way you look at things on the other side of a window. Present, visible, real in some sense, but not quite in the same space as you are. Not reachable in the ordinary way. I don't think she meant us any harm. I don't think she was thinking about us in those terms at all." He paused for a moment, looking out the window of the room where the interview was being conducted. At the street outside, at the ordinary afternoon. "I think we were the ones she didn't understand," he said. 3 cases. 7 men in a circle, hands open, eyes fixed on a center point where something had rested with great weight and left a mark in the wood, and nothing else. 12 people. A clock stopped at 4:52. A Bible open to the chapter about the night the angel passed through. A light moving through the trees in silence toward the water. And then nothing. And then 64 years before anyone read the letter that described what a woman saw from her window in the dark. A woman who arrived on a levee road, speaking a language no human scholar could place, who waited with patient attention in a locked cell for 6 days, who folded her blanket before she left, who passed through a wall of solid brick and left no seam. The state of Louisiana closed all 3 cases, filed them, archived them in the methodical way that institutions archive the things they cannot explain. Not destroyed, not denied, simply placed in the correct drawer and labeled with the correct number, and left in the dark, where the correct people will not think to look. But there is a pattern in these 3 cases that does not appear in any official document, and it is this. In each case, those involved did not seem afraid. The 7 men on the porch did not struggle. They did not flee. They did not cry out. And Arsenault, who spent 2 full days with them, said they were not the kind of men who would have received whatever called them in silence if silence was not, in some sense, chosen. They opened their hands. They sat down. They waited. The Tureaud family folded the children's nightgowns. They placed the spoon on the edge of the pot. They pushed back 1 chair. Only one, the 8th. The one whose plate was empty, the one whose occupant had apparently already risen and gone somewhere before the others. And then They set down everything they were holding, and they left, in the direction of the water, in the silence between the frogs, in the company of a light that moved without flickering through the trees. The woman in the cell ate her dinner. She folded her blanket. She left without disturbance, without urgency, without any of the signs that would accompany an escape made in fear. Whatever the bayou called them toward, they went quietly, as though they had been told in advance what to expect, as though the call was not the first contact, but the last one. The bayou has been here longer than any of this, longer than the parishes, longer than the state, longer than the people who came and named its waters and drew property lines around it and built their camps on its banks and told themselves that they understood it because they had given it a name. It has been here through every season, every flood, every storm that rearranged the landscape around it while it remained. The water finding its level again, the cypress roots holding on to whatever is below. It keeps its own records in a language that none of the investigators, none of the physicians, none of the professors, none of the reporters or archivists or historians who came after have been able to read. Somewhere in that water, in the dark between the roots, in the space beneath the surface that reflects a sky belonging to no particular year, three sets of unanswered questions rest alongside whatever else the bayou has decided to keep. What was in the center of that circle? Where the light was going? What the woman was waiting for? In her cell, with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the door with the expression of someone who already knows what comes next. The frogs still call at night along Bayou Sorrel. The levee road near Plaquemine is still there, still running south along the river, toward the edge of the parishes, where the land loses its argument with the water for the last time. The land where the Tureaud plantation stood has been cleared and sold and cleared again, and the Oak Line Drive is gone, and there is nothing left to indicate that 12 people once ate their supper there and folded their children's nightgowns and walked out toward the trees on a November night and were never seen again. The water is still there. It has always been there, patient, still, reflecting a sky that belongs to no particular year. And if something in it is still sending out whatever signal reached 7 men on a back porch, and 12 people around a breakfast table, and a woman walking barefoot on an empty road at 6:30 in the morning, the question is not whether you would hear it. The question is whether you already have, and whether the reason you are here, listening to this at this hour, is simply that you have not yet decided what to do about it.